Hi, and welcome to the Diversity Report podcasts, where we interview the movers and shakers and diverse innovators in today's world. I'm Deborah Levine, your host and editor of the American Diversity Report. And with me today is Leonard Sipes, who has 50 years of national and state criminal justice experience with 35 years of media relations and social media work. He has over 50 national and regional awards for media relations, and he is the principal crime prevention spokesman for the federal government for 10 years, helping give birth to, and I'm sure you all remember this, McGruff the Crime Dog National Media Campaign. He authored Success with the Media, and he's here with us today to talk about justice and the media. Thank you, Len, for joining us.
Deborah, it's my pleasure.
Great. So share with us a little bit about the media, crime, and justice today. What's happening?
Well, first thing people need to understand is that the media, the number of people covering news has declined dramatically throughout the years. There's great media coverage by newspapers in particular all throughout the United States. And there are breaking issues in terms of race, in terms of crime, in terms of diversity, in terms of crime prevention. So those issues are being covered. But one of my personal disappointments is that when I was working the crime beat as a spokesperson for national and state criminal justice agencies, I had some of the best people on the face of the earth in terms of reporters covering crime and justice issues, and they really held government's feet to the fire. That doesn't happen that much anymore. Again, you have some newsrooms throughout the country where the cuts in staff have ranged between 30 and 50%. So there just aren't that many reporters out there anymore. But the ones that are still there are doing yeoman's work, and they're doing a great job in terms of covering the crime beat. But we're just not getting the number of articles and reports that we did in past decades.
I'm sorry to hear that. This is an important element of society. What does it mean for us that we're not getting the kind of coverage we have had in the past?
Well, that's my concern, Deborah, because in the final analysis, I am a citizen like anybody else, and I've been doing public affairs for national and state criminal justice organizations for 35 years. But in essence, beyond that, I'm a citizen, and I want to be informed, and I want that information to flow to me. And government is pretty lethargic in terms of publicizing its own events and its own issues. And it's the media that keeps us honest. It's the media that holds our feet to the fire. Now, that I'm not going to try to suggest that there aren't biases within the media, that there aren't problems within the media, and that all coverage was fair, but that's not my call as a spokesperson. That's up to the media to protect us. It is the fourth estate, and without a strong, vigorous media to report on the activities of government, we all fail. And we all lose. So I just want the listeners to understand that there was a golden age several decades ago, or just a couple decades ago, or 10 years ago, where media reports came fast and furious. But the media has shrunk, and they're not nearly as powerful as they used to be. And I think that is unfortunate because with the crime and justice issue, more than ever, we need hard-hitting reporting, examining government and examining what it is that government is doing in terms of trying to keep us all safe.
Does this situation affect the amount of crime, for better or worse, that we are experiencing?
Well, that's a very complicated topic because, I just wrote on my website a couple days ago that, and this is going to sound different from what I just told you, that the level of crime coverage is, especially regarding law enforcement. I'm a former law enforcement officer, and I think that the vast majority of police officers out there are good human beings who are simply trying to do a very difficult job and to try to get it done as easy and as and to be as effective as they possibly can be. But I think the crime coverage within the last 2 years has caused a lot of police officers to not be as aggressive as they used to be, to sit back. They're responding to all the negatives that are going on. If you take a look at reports from the FBI and if you take a look at reports from Pew, there's no doubt per surveys of police officers that they are holding back. They're not being as aggressive as they used to be. And that many criminologists out there will suggest that that holding back is affecting the possibility of a rise in crime throughout the country in many, not all cities. But violent crime has gone up for the first time in a couple of years in 2015, and violent crime is up for the first 6 months of 2016. So the media coverage unto itself may have an impact on the crime problem. That doesn't mean that the media should not hold our feet to the fire in terms of what's happening throughout the country. There are very diverse issues. There are very tough issues that we have to deal with in terms of crime prevention, law enforcement, and policing, especially within poor and minority communities. So it has to be a balance, though, because we're having a hard time now recruiting police officers, and a lot of police officers are leaving the force. So somehow, some way, good, hard-hitting coverage has to be balanced in such a way that the average police officer doesn't feel that he or she is under attack, and that they are not being as aggressive as they used to be. And some of them are contemplating leaving.
They're contemplating leaving. How will this, if that trend continues, say, for the next 5 years, what will our law enforcement departments look like in the average city?
We're having a very hard time recruiting police officers. Some cities like Washington, D.C. are considering offering a bonus to veteran police officers to stay. But there's a discussion within the law enforcement community, and I know firsthand from 2 or 3 families where they are encouraging their police officer family members to get out of law enforcement, that it's just too dangerous. I just did an article on crimeinamerika.net yesterday about the vast increases in police officers being murdered on the job, injured on the job. The numbers, the percentages are quite startling. So there are a variety of conversations happening throughout the country, whether it be the communities that are served by police officers or by police officers themselves. And there's a lot of discussion going on. And what we need to do is to respect each other's points of view, to embrace the community, to have the community embrace law enforcement, and to be sure that everybody cooperates to make sure that everybody is safe as humanly possible. And that takes a good degree of fortitude to look at everybody's points of view and incorporate everybody's points of view, embrace everybody's points of view. We're all different. We all need to respect each other's opinions. But we all need to work together to make sure that the community is safe. And equally at the same time, we all need to work together to make sure that police officers are not being characterized in such a way that all cops are bad, all cops are evil, all cops are violent. I think that's what police officers are responding to. Once you take away that role of protector in the eyes of a lot of people in law enforcement, there's no reason to be a cop. So we're sort of trying to put the word out there to everybody needs to come together and talk, and everybody needs to respect the opinions of others, and everybody needs to understand the other person's point of view.
Well, I know here in Chattanooga, we are looking at hiring a new chief for our law enforcement department, and there will be conversations around the choice. What kinds of issues come up in a conversation like that?
Well, first of all, police chiefs don't stay that long. That's another problem that we have in this country. That you're ordinarily going to get 4 or 5 years out of a chief of police before he goes voluntarily or involuntarily. Policing is extraordinarily tough today. It is almost impossibly tough. because there are people on both sides of the issue, and they want to be sure that they're heard. So you need to find a person who is conciliatory, who wants to hear all sides, who wants to be sure that his or her police officers are well trained, well paid, well taken care of, that they feel appreciated, and at the same time, they want to be sure that the community is well taken care of and respected, and their views are incorporated in terms of what law enforcement officers do. So that's a really difficult task, to be able to thread both sides and to pierce the needle and to make sure that everybody is heard and welcomed and embraced. And for the average chief of police, that is extraordinarily difficult to do. I've spent 35 years representing law enforcement in correctional agencies, and wow, it sometimes can be really difficult to really embrace everybody and to try to please everybody.
I'm sure it is. One of the things that we're experiencing is a great attempt to deal with anything to do with gang violence. And it's a tough issue. There doesn't seem to be excellent resolutions to this. Have you found that some of your colleagues in law enforcement have been successful in doing that particular piece?
Well, that takes the community, and I think people need to understand that when it comes to the issue of crime control, it's law enforcement, law enforcement, law enforcement. I'd like to look at it at the other way around. When it comes to crime, it's pretty much the community's responsibility, not law enforcement's responsibility. Let me give you some examples. If you choose to beat your spouse or your significant other, there's little law enforcement can do. They can respond afterwards, but there's little law enforcement can do. If you cheat on your income taxes, if you take drugs, if you do things that are injurious to the larger community, that's pretty much society's responsibility to control itself, not law enforcement. Law enforcement is there to respond to calls and to stabilize communities in such a way that they can handle their own crime problems. So first thing we have to understand is that it's, for people to say it's the responsibility of law enforcement to solve our crime problems, that's not true. If you don't have the cooperation of the community, if the community does not take the lead in terms of embracing issues and embracing solutions, nothing's going to work on the law enforcement side. You can't arrest yourself out of crime problems. You can arrest people who do bad things, and you can incarcerate people who do bad things. But once again, in the final analysis, it's up to us as citizens to propose solutions and to become actively involved. And the gang problem is, I think, a wonderful example of that. I mean, we have to set very clear standards in terms of what is acceptable within a society, and what we will tolerate as individuals, what we will tolerate as a community, and we've got to be sure that everybody in that community is clear. I mean, let's take sexual assault. No means no, period. There's no leeway there. We cannot allow women or men, in some instances, but the vast majority of women, we cannot allow that to happen to our fellow citizens. So the message there is no means no. You do not have the right to assault. You do not have the right to demean. You do not have the right to cause that person any grief whatsoever. So if we're going to protect women, if we're going to protect the elderly, if we're going to protect our most vulnerable citizens, we have to send a very clear message as to what's acceptable and what isn't. Law enforcement is there to be a partner, but I'm not quite sure law enforcement is there to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A number of years ago, I was asked by the law enforcement department in a suburb outside of Chicago to put together diversity quick reference diversity cards so that law enforcement officers would have the right vocabulary to deal with different ethnic groups, religious groups. There was a real attempt to make that interface work. And I was very admirable. It was very admirable of them to see that the vocabulary, the terminology itself was helpful. And the training that these police folks got was, I think, excellent. How is training today of our law enforcement officers reflecting the great diversity of our population?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and I'll give you one quick example. I'm looking at data now in terms of an article that I'm preparing for Crime in America about school-related crime and campus-related crime, and some of the best statistics on gay and lesbian issues come from this report. And I am aware of extraordinary problems within the gay and lesbian community, a transgender community, in terms of the fact that they are victimized much more than others. So we within law enforcement need to embrace the gay and lesbian and transgender community. We don't have any choice. If we're going to keep people safe, those issues represented by the gay, lesbian, transgender community become our issues. So we need to fully understand, fully embrace, and fully protect these communities to the very best of our ability. Again, noting that the primary responsibility for crime prevention comes from citizens, not from law enforcement. But it doesn't relieve us of that responsibility. We have to embrace that responsibility. We have to be sure that all of our fellow citizens are taken care of. So we need to understand all communities. We need to embrace all communities. It doesn't matter who they are. We just simply need to embrace who they are, what they are. We need to work with them every single day. We need to understand them. We need to have compassion for their circumstances. We need to serve them in a way that lowers their rates of crime. So that's the bottom line in law enforcement. And that becomes an extraordinarily immense challenge to embrace everybody, whether they be African Americans, whether they be gay and lesbians, whether they be the Arab community, whether they be the Jewish community, the Hispanic community. It's our obligation to understand who they are, what they want, and to make sure that we are as comfortable as humanly possible in terms of dealing with all citizens, regardless of what group they happen to represent, so we can serve them better. That's the bottom line, and that's been the bottom line of law enforcement for an awfully long time. I understand there's animosity towards law enforcement. I understand that there's distrust regarding law enforcement, but it's up to the community and the police, because people keep saying, what is the police department doing about this? And I shoot back, what is the community doing about it? Where is it said that it's law enforcement's responsibility to solve these problems? It's the community's responsibility to come to law enforcement and say, hey, we think that we have a solution. We think that you're not listening to us. We think that we have a better way of doing it. And then it's up to law enforcement to listen and to embrace.
Tell me about how much time was spent training law enforcement officers in the interface with the community these days. It sounds like it would need to be substantial.
Well, the bottom line answer to that is not enough. I'm reading a report right now on terms of training to deal with mental health issues. And so what some states are saying, instead of giving 16 hours in the academy, they're talking about a full 40-hour course just to deal with mental health issues. There are 18,000 police departments, 19,000 police departments in the United States. It is very difficult and very expensive to train to give a 40-hour block of time just to deal with this one particular issue. And remember, we're losing police officers, and we're having a very difficult time training or acquiring new police officers. So not only is it a matter of training, it's a matter of retraining on a yearly basis. So when you have 18,000 police departments, the level of complexity that we have within this country, there's not nearly enough time provided to these individual police officers. They have to learn how to drive. They have to learn how to handle a firearm. They have to learn how to give first aid. They have to learn crisis intervention. There are so many things that a police officer needs to know, needs to understand. Then when you add the endless layers of complexity on top of that in terms of the various communities that they're supposed to serve, and police officers or police commanders will point out to me, well, Leonard, we do have to actually get out there and patrol. We do have to get out there and respond to calls for service. We can't constantly be in training. So that's the issue. If we're going to be effective, then we need to keep police officers to be sure that they're well trained, well paid, and that we actually keep them, because the investment that we put in each and every police officer is probably about $100,000 or more per officer. So we're investing as citizens an awful lot of money in terms of training them and in terms of trying to get them to understand the worlds in which they live in and patrol in. So these issues, whether it be gay, lesbian, Hispanic, African American, it doesn't matter. We just don't have enough training, and we just don't have the time to have that comprehensive level of training. So hiring quality people becomes a key issue. Psychologically testing them to be sure that they come with as few biases as humanly possible is also extraordinarily important.
This has been very educational. I had no idea. $100,000 invested in each police officer. Yes?
Well, that's the initial training. That's not the retraining and the in-service training and the specialized training that happens every year.
I see. Wow. I'm going to be looking at our local law enforcement officers very differently from now on, let me tell you, with great respect. And I think people don't understand what is happening here and what is needed. I know that there are desires for what might happen, but I think the communities need to step up. Definitely.
Well, everybody needs to step up. It is a shared responsibility. I have gone to so many community meetings throughout my career where people have said, what is law enforcement going to do? And I've always thought that was backwards. I think its communities should say, hey, here's what we want you to do.
Mm-hmm. That does require some focus and some thought and some strategic planning, for sure.
And it requires everybody to bring it down 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 levels, whether it be on the law enforcement side or whether it be on the community side, especially when it comes to diversity issues. We have to understand each other. We have to understand that cops, and when I say this, there's a lot of pushback where people will say, well, Leonard, nobody's forcing anybody to be a cop. Well, that's true. But these are people who have, you cannot go and see a child beaten, badly beaten, or sexually abused without it affecting you. You cannot go into a horrible automobile accident without it affecting you. You cannot see a shooting without it affecting you. Well, police officers see this multiple times throughout the course of the shift. They're human beings. People need to understand that law enforcement is an extraordinarily dangerous and stressful job. So people need to understand that cops are human. that they make mistakes. There's no excuse whatsoever for police officers beating somebody or shooting somebody where it's not justified. Every law enforcement officer out there understands that and agrees with that. But the flip side is that police officers need to say to themselves, we're partners with the community. And regardless as to what diversity issue falls in our lap, it's our responsibility to understand where they're coming from and understand who they are and understand their wants and desires and their fears. And it's their responsibility to embrace everybody within that community. And I think the overwhelming majority of police officers are more than willing to do that. They need to be trained. Going back to the mental health issue, there's a lot of police officers who simply are not qualified to deal with very complex mental health issues. So the smart thing to do is for a community to have on-call mental health specialists 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and let them respond and let them handle that issue. And then people will say, Leonard, we don't have the money to do that. So what we end up doing is throwing police officers into handling very complex mental health issues that they're not trained to handle. So there's a huge issue here in terms of finances, training, time, and diversity, which everybody needs to back off a little bit and sit down with each other and start talking respectfully to each other. We cannot afford to stereotype cops. We cannot afford to stereotype anybody. We have to embrace everybody.
Well, my hope is that this conversation between you and I will be a catalyst for that discussion and get people to come together and talk about the priorities and the needs and how the community can provide it and how law enforcement can complement it. Is there something?
I think it's what we're all praying. I think it's what we're all praying for.
All praying for. Is there?
I think every single night when I say my prayers, I pray for peace. I pray for understanding. And I pray for people to bring it down a notch or two or three or four and recognize that we're all fallible. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes, but we all need to be dedicated to each other's well-being. That's the bottom line, dedicated to each other's well-being. And with the help of God, we can accomplish that.
Well, thank you. You are an inspiration, and I appreciate your sharing this with us and all the years of experience that have gone into your expertise. You're definitely a treasure. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No. My website is crimeinamerica.net. I write about media issues at Leonard Sipes, SIPES.com. And my book is Success with the Media, available at Amazon.
Well, thank you. I'm sure that our audience will be looking up your website and your book, as will I. Thank you again.
And people feel free to interact with me at leonardsipes@gmail.com.
I certainly will. And please keep in touch with me as we, in our community, go forward with our discussions. And we'll look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
A pleasure. And thank you, audience, for joining us and for being part of the Diversity Report podcasts.